Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I'm in the dark here tonight. I'm calling in from cottage country in Canada, Ontario, precisely. This month, we read You Think It, I'll Say It by Curtis Sittenfeld, and we are so lucky to be with her this evening. We are going to get all the answers to all our hot questions about the book we read this month. Just a little bit of background about Curtis. She is the best-selling author of 5 novels: Prep, The Man of My Dreams, American Wife, Sisterland, and Eligible. Her first story collection, You Think It, I'll Say It, was published in 2018 and picked for Reese Witherspoon's book club, which we all want to know more about that. Her books have been selected by the New York Times, Time, Entertainment Weekly, and People for their 10 best books of the year lists, optioned for television and film, and translated into 30 languages. Her short stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The Washington Post, and Esquire, and her nonfiction has appeared in The New York Times, Time, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, Slate, and On This American Life. She is a graduate of Stanford University and the Iowa's Writers Workshop, and she's interviewed Michelle Obama, very cool, for Time, and appeared as a guest on NPR's Fresh Air, CBS's Early Show, and PBS's NewsHour, and twice been a easy Jeopardy answer. Very cool. I didn't even read that as far as that last time. Well,
as a little gift for you at the end of the bio to test if you finished it. Just kidding.
How are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm good, thank you. Don't be shy, Catherine. We don't mind seeing you drink your beverage.
Catherine is our Chicago host, actually. She just turned on her computer and realized her video camera's on, I'm sure. So.
All right, no problem. All right. Well, thank you for having me here tonight. I feel like there's like all this technology and sort of forums that didn't exist when my publishing career started, almost 15 years ago. So it's always interesting to try to keep up.
Completely different promotion now for your books, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. There's some stuff has stayed the same and then some stuff has evolved. But yeah, of course, I always feel very grateful. Like having readers can never be taken for granted, and I think probably less so as the years pass.
Can you tell us exactly how you got into this industry, and did you graduate from Stanford and go right into publishing?
Yes and no. So I graduated from college in 1997, and I had worked a lot for the student newspaper, and that summer I went and worked for the Charlotte Observer, the daily newspaper in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I was sort of a general assignment reporter. Meaning I would sometimes do things like, beloved drugstore was closing. And so I would go talk to people about how they felt about this beloved drugstore closing. Or, sometimes there were sort of like fun or funny articles. Like there was one where a man rented, the sort of, I'm trying to think what material he rented like a knight's silver armor and a white horse to go propose to his girlfriend. And so I covered that proposal. So I was in the writing world. I was not writing novels. And then I ended up, after that, I worked at a business magazine. And then after that, I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop and got my MFA in writing. And so by the time I finished, it was 2001. And I was probably half or 3/4 of the way through writing my first novel, Prep. And then that came out in 2005. So everything I've described happened over about 7 or 8 years. I can keep going. I can lead us from 2005 to 2019 if you want.
But that is a very enviable kind of path into writing, because I know lots of people end up you've been writing all along, and that's obviously your passion.
Yeah. No, I definitely, it's funny because I feel like I've often read, and heard. Are you still there, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, I can no longer see anything, including my own face, which of course is kind of liberating. But so I've read and heard where people will say, you know, only women who are professionally successful say they're lucky, and like, you know, men say like I worked hard or I earned it, or you know, like these things happen because of my sort of strengths and attributes. And I feel simultaneously like I do feel like I work hard, and I do feel like I'm very lucky. And I think one of the biggest pieces of luck is that my first novel, Prep, um, we can go into this more if you guys are interested in this, but a lot of times in publishing, a bestseller is it's sort of decided 18 months before publication, that a lot of effort will be put into it. And that's not what happened with my book. Like it received a sort of respectable, but you know, not shockingly high, and very far from shockingly high, like on the low side, advance or payment. And but nevertheless, the publisher and the publicist ultimately really got behind it and supported it, and it was a surprise bestseller. And the reality is not that many books even in a year are surprise bestsellers. So that book gave me a sort of stability that actually is really hard to achieve. And I think that when I say that I'm lucky, like I feel like it would have been the same book. Like I would have worked equally hard on it if it had sold, you know, many copies or few copies. And so given that, I'm lucky that it sold, you know, a relatively high number.
I can relate to that. I feel like there are just so many books out there now. So if you don't have the marketing behind them, then actually getting your hands on them. So like a surprise bestseller is quite a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it certainly was in the context of my own life.
Sorry, Curtis, we're looking at your games shelf now.
Oh no.
It looks like you have some very good choices on there. I'm not gonna lie.
Wait, now are you looking at me?
I am. We can see you now.
This is, I have to say, I feel like that's yeah, if things get a little boring and we want to play Twister or Scrabble, we could. I just wanted you guys to know you have options. Okay, as we were saying, I know, I have to say, in all honesty, I can see nothing on screen now. Like it's kind of blank. So, but you know, maybe it'll be like an exciting surprise when the video comes back to me.
Well,
So
you look
keep telling me, tell me if I do anything embarrassing.
Okay, well, we have 3 questions in the chat window, and I will read them. Don't worry. So we
Okay.
have.
I think I actually can see those, or at least a few. A few.
Okay.
I can see a partial part of the sentence in this magnificent new world of technology we live in.
So the book we read, You Think It, I'll Say It, is very different from the other books.
Mm-hmm.
Justine would like to know what kind of drove you to put together the stories in this short story book.
So what happened was, I always loved to read short stories, you know, from the time I would say in high school, if not earlier. Um, and then you know, when I was in grad school, I wrote short stories, but because my first book was a story collection, I sort of got away from writing them. And it was almost like I got on the novel writing path, the way some people get on like a memoir writing path or a nonfiction path. And then, you know, I'm trying to think, 11 years passed. I wrote several novels, and I would hear about something, or I would just have a random idea, and I would think, ooh, that would make a good story, but I wasn't really writing them. And in 2016, shortly after my novel Eligible came out, I thought, like, I'm gonna just like try to write a short story again. And I had written a couple that had been commissioned by editors, magazine editors, but I hadn't written one sort of just for myself or just about whatever I wanted it to be about. And that story ended up being Gender Studies, which is the first story in the book. And it actually, like, coming back to short stories after all this time away, I felt like it was really sort of like exhilarating, and made me feel like I think that my writing skills have developed, and in some ways probably as I've gotten older, like my, ability to understand human nature, which of course is still very incomplete, but maybe, like a little bit more expansive than it once was. And it just, like, the form just felt so satisfying, and it felt, you can sort of be writing a short story and be excited about it the whole time, because it might just take a few weeks to write. Whereas I feel like with a novel, there are some kind of places where you just think, look, I hate this, or I wish I had never come up with this idea. Like, it takes years, and so there are huge rewards to writing novels, but I wouldn't say there's always sustained excitement. So basically, I wrote that story, and I enjoyed it so much, and the miracle occurred that it was published in the New Yorker, which is something I had always tried for and never achieved. And so both those things, I thought, I want to write more stories, and I want more of them to be in the New Yorker. And not all of them were, but some were.
Well, you certainly have a gift for it, because I do not read short stories ever. And when my colleague,
oh, Aaron,
I know,
no, you're actually, it's funny because I will say, some people, I'll let you ask the question, but I will interrupt briefly to say, quite a few people have said to me, I don't like short stories, but I like yours. And I feel like I have a lot of, like, ambivalence about that, where I'll think, like, there's amazing short story writers like you. If I'm the only short story writer you've ever read, like, branch out. And are you Canadian?
Yes.
Alice Monroe.
Oh, yes,
For the love of God, Aaron. Alice Monroe.
So
Anyway,
I don't say that I don't like them. I just say that I don't read them.
I don't know that that's a very significant distinction. Okay, what was your question before I interrupted you?
So what I was going to say is, so the reason I don't read them is because I'm worried they won't capture me. And I didn't have that problem at all with yours. So I actually wrote, like, a little bit of I wrote a newsletter about your book, and one thing was like, oh gosh, maybe I should look into short stories.
You should. Wait, so I'm not trying to shame you. Have you read any short stories by Alice Monroe?
I've read Alice Monroe, but not her short stories.
She's amazing and wonderful, and yeah, I think you'll find them very gripping. It's very hard for me to conceive of her doing, like, a video chat like this, but she's still worth reading very much.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I will certainly check those out. Everybody else, did you hear that? Especially if you're Canadian. She's a Canadian author.
Especially if even if you're just a human being, if you're a member of the human race, she'll speak to you. She's my favorite writer by far.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's one of our questions.
There you go.
You're answering them before they're asked. Amazing.
Ha.
Okay, so I'm sorry, my small human is screaming in the background.
That's okay. That's okay. Once you've seen my game shelf, I feel like we could just let it all hang out.
Fair. Fair. We have a question here from Katie. She's curious how you chose the name of this book, and was it about the particular story that prompted it to receive title status?
Sorry, what was it about that story that made it achieve title status? Is that the...
Well, yeah. I don't know if the question is that, or if it's, did you write this story after you chose the title, or which came first, maybe?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the story she's referring to is called "The World Has Many Butterflies," and as most people participating in this discussion probably know, it's at a sort of preppy country club party, a man comes up to a woman and says to her, and they're both married to other people, they don't even know each other particularly well, and he says, "I'll think it, you say it." And it's not totally clear what he means by that, but she interprets it to mean you make sort of entertaining, judgmental, nasty comments about other guests at this party, and I will enjoy them. And you're sort of speaking on behalf of both of us. So she does it, and then they continue to kind of reenact this at future gatherings. And a friend of mine who read the story early, a friend of mine whose name is Emily Jean Miller. I also recommend her fiction. She's not Canadian, but I nevertheless recommend her fiction. She said, you know, it's a sort of like reverse or inversion of the title. So what he says is, "I'll think it, you say it," and obviously the title is "You think it, I'll say it." But my friend Emily said, you know, what he says to do, or what this game is kind of what you do as a writer, Curtis. And I felt like it was like, in some ways, like, I would like to believe that's true. I don't know if everyone thinks that, but I do think that I sometimes in my stories like to write about like the thing that, you know, that's sort of this sort of like awkward or inappropriate thing that is the true thing that people are actually thinking, instead of what they're supposed to be thinking or what they wish they were thinking.
Well, I absolutely picked up on that in most of your stories.
Uh,
Okay, let's move along so Catherine is actually asking a question from our discussion questions. We made our own discussion questions for this book, and one of them was, is there any themes that you think tie all the stories together? And so Catherine says that her group spent a long time discussing it and trying to find a uniting theme. I don't even know if there is a uniting theme. It was just a question to provoke discussion. So can you speak to that?
yeah, so I think that it's not like, in terms of there being a uniting theme, I don't think it's like it boils down to a sentence where it's not like you would say the world is this way or human nature is this way. I think it's more that a high proportion of the stories are about you know, relatively affluent or privileged, educated white women. Most of them live in the Midwest. Most of them are like, you know, sort of intelligent, but kind of their own worst enemy, or in some cases, like, not particularly happy. And I feel like when I was younger, I think I probably would have felt like I should make there be more variety in a story collection for the sake of variety, and maybe there should be you know, stories set in other countries or in other time periods, or even in other like geographical regions of the United States. And I actually think, I think as a reader, I like in other story collections, I like when it feels like these all came out of one particular mind, and, you know, it feels sort of obsessive. And I do, in some ways, I feel like the Midwest at times seems underrepresented to me in contemporary fiction. And so I felt like, you know, that it was like I kind of embraced the similarities among the stories, and instead of trying to make them different for the sake of being different. And a lot of them also, you know, they're sort of political, they're about, you know, marriage, celebrity, you know, being kind of consumed by thoughts of the past. And so those to me are that's what I would mean by themes. I think different people define theme in different ways.
Okay, fair enough. And kind of on the same topic, another very, very good question is, Catherine goes on to say that they spent a lot of time debating the order of the stories and whether putting the stories in a different order would influence the reader's mood when they finished it. How deliberate, intentional was the order of the stories?
It was quite deliberate and intentional, although I think there came a point, like, it's like when it was hard to, I don't know, like, I didn't feel like a perfect sequence existed and that I was going to uncover it. I originally, this is so weird sounding that it almost won't make sense, but I actually kind of thought, like, if you can picture a staircase, I feel like the staircase would be in like Downton Abbey or something, but if you can picture a staircase where two flights of steps, or two like sort of half flights, both lead up to a landing. I originally kind of conceived of the stories that way, where it would almost be like there was a mirror image in each, because each story has a kind of twin, except that ultimately, and then there originally were 11 stories, there now are 10 stories. But the twin thing didn't, it's almost like it worked for like 70% or 80% of the book, but it didn't work completely, which meant it didn't work. So I think that I felt like I didn't want two stories that had really overlapping themes to be right next to each other unless it would seem intentional. So that's kind of what I did. But in the end, I think it wasn't like it's not like there's some secret formula there. It's almost like I wanted to have a secret formula, but I ultimately didn't.
So there wasn't a lot of thought about like how the last story, was that very like intentional, being like, okay, this is the story that must close the book?
Yeah, actually I did. I will say, I think the first and the last story did, those stories to me are kind of, those are twins. Like I would have to like look at the table of contents, and naturally, even though I'm next to my game shelf, I'm not next to my own book. I would have to look at the table of contents to tell you the other sort of twin stories. But and I think they're like fraternal twins, not identical twins. But so in the first story, it's like a couple who, is sort of talking. It's before the 2016, US election, the presidential election. There's a couple that's kind of disagreeing about Trump, and there's sexual tension. And then the last story is after the 2016 election. There's a couple that's having a conversation that's kind of influenced by Trump, and there's sexual tension. So I did feel like those stories, it felt like, gender studies did feel like the first one, and then do-over did feel like the last.
Very, very interesting. I didn't even think about that, so I thought it was a great question. Do you have a favorite story in the book, and if so, which one and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know that I do, actually. They're just all so good. It's hard to choose. I mean, I think, I feel like I wrote them, most of them I wrote in a period of maybe like 18 months. And a couple are older. I'm trying to think. I don't know. No, I mean, again, I stand by them. Yeah, I don't think I would say I have a favorite.
Fair enough. So I think you can handle this question. It's a bit, she said one of her members felt that you often portrayed women as incompetent. Do you agree? And if yes, is there a reason behind this?
Do I think women are incompetent? Like no, I do not think women are incompetent. It's that question is it's a little bit difficult to answer. I mean, it's not difficult to answer in the sense that I would never disparage an entire gender, or I would never classify an entire gender with one adjective. I'm not sure what she's referring to. Like, are they professionally incompetent? Are they personally incompetent? I don't, in fact, I actually think several of them are professionally successful. It's like a very successful lawyer, a successful doctor, a person who's writing a celebrity profile who manages to pull it off even though she like barely has childcare for her relatively young baby. So I think I would disagree with that assessment. But I'm happy to, if there's a sort of follow-up, I'm happy to delve into it further.
So she emailed it to me, so there won't be follow-up, but I promised her I would ask, even though I wasn't entirely sure that I agreed with her either.
I mean, again, it's also, I think, to read a story collection or to read fiction and frankly nonfiction. I mean, people, it's very subjective. And if somebody could say, this is a horrible book, and I would never, I would never try to convince someone that they're wrong, or like if she said the characters are incompetent, I do feel that the person who asked the question is entitled to her opinion, even if I don't agree with it, and even if I'm the one who wrote the book. It's not, I think that it's art. Think what you want to think.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. So we have a very good question here from Nicole. It's a bit lengthy, but I'll read it to you. She says, short stories are a bit polarizing for folks. Seems people feel that a collection of short stories are difficult to enjoy because they can end somewhat abruptly without as much development as you'd like. Is that hard for an author? Do you feel like the short stories are still in their infancy, or did each of them feel fully realized to you?
Do I feel like the stories in the collection are in their infancy, or do I feel like short stories in the world are in their infancy?
I believe he's talking about your stories. Do you think like there's a full book in any of the short stories you've written?
Oh, I was gonna say, I feel like my stories are in their full and splendid womanhood, and that's why I published them. I can see more going back to some of the protagonists of some of the stories and writing about them again in another story, more than I can see writing a full novel based on any of the stories. But I do feel like one of the sort of likeliest ways to kind of contradict myself is to publicly declare that I will definitely do something, or I'll never definitely do something. So if I say no, I would never write a novel based on any of those stories, then I probably will, in the next 6 months.
Fair enough. I have a question from Hillary in Baltimore. She asked, she wondered if there was supposed to be any symbolic reason that you had the butterfly land on the main character's arm from the book's title story. She said it seemed like it was supposed to be significant, but she couldn't figure out why.
Well, I think in that story, there's this belief which another character expresses, that I think that you get to make a wish if a butterfly lands on your arm, or that it's somehow good luck. And I think that character feels like she's in a sort of particularly unlucky moment right then. And I think she isn't, it's not as if the butterfly landing on her arm makes her feel like that's changed. Do you know what I mean? She just feels like, I feel unlucky, and this thing that's supposed to be symbolically lucky happened, and doesn't really change the way I feel. So I don't, yeah, I mean, I think it's more, I think a lot of the stories are about the discrepancy between how people sort of appear to feel and how they really feel, which it feels like that seems so relevant, especially in the age of social media, where we all can, misrepresent ourselves almost effortlessly. And then but I think it's just like a function of life, or this sort of, this feeling of her feeling profoundly unlucky, or feeling really devastated in that moment, and someone saying, "Oh, you get to make a wish." And so I think it's basically supposed to highlight that.
I think that plays in really to the magic of the book, actually, because what really stayed with me was quite a lot of the stories I was thinking about later. I walked away, I'd finished the book, but then they came back to me, and that I was just having these dreams about these books, and wondering.
Really?
Yeah, wondering. I think once you finish a book and then you are still thinking about it, that's a good book.
I know, it's actually interesting, because I feel like as a consumer of books or movies, you can't always predict what will stay with you or what you'll think about, and sometimes it's tied to enjoyment, but sometimes it's not. There's yeah, I've definitely had that experience where I give more thought to something than I would have imagined that I would in the moment of consuming it.
Absolutely. So I read in an interview that you did that you were writing a book on Hillary Clinton, and I was just wondering if that's still in the works, or if you finished it, and have you met her?
Um, so the book is definitely still in the works. I'm trying to put the finishing touches on it. So I thought to myself that I would write like a tight little 200-page novel, and I did. And it's probably like a 500-page novel. There's a lot about Hillary Clinton. But the premise, so in real life, Hillary Rodham, who was then in her early 20s, fell in love with Bill Clinton at Yale Law School. And soon after they graduated, he proposed to her for the first time. And then he proposed to her at least one other time. And she said no in both cases. And then in real life, the third time she said yes. And the premise of my novel is, what if she had said no the third time too and kind of gone off and had her own life? It's a totally normal, not weird premise at all. But yeah, it's been very interesting and consuming for me to write it. And I think it'll probably come out probably like, midway through 2020, but it's a little bit murky still.
Oh, that's so interesting. I can't wait to read that. What is your connection to politics and your writing? You just enjoy writing?
Well, it's funny because I wrote a book. I had a novel come out in 2008 called American Wife, which is a fictional retelling of the life of Laura Bush. And I'm a Democrat, but I liked Laura Bush and found her very intriguing. And I think I probably did not think I would write a book similar to that again. And in fact, 12 years have passed since then. 12 years? Yeah, well, since the book came out. So it's sort of interesting to me, like, I don't know, like if you said to me, are you obsessed with politics? I would not say I'm obsessed. Like I would say, I think if you were to look at my Twitter feed, you might think I'm obsessed with politics. And it's, right now, I think American politics feel pretty consuming, and, there's so many people running for president and whatnot. But I don't think if you said to me, like, I don't know, like I would not say I'm a political junkie or something. Or if you said like, I can tell you the 3rd district in Northwest Arkansas where Bill Clinton ran for Congress in 1974, because of the research I've done for this book. I could not tell you anything about any of the congressional districts in Arkansas if I had not been writing this. But you know what I mean? Like, I'm not that kind of person who can sort of just has like endless facts inside my head. But I do think that the personalities in politics are different, or interesting. And, certainly, obviously, policy affects people's lives in a very real way every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's just a comment here from Christine. She said, quote unquote, sliding doors type books seem to be a theme lately. And
Yeah.
she's read a couple recently, and she thinks.
Oh, which ones has she read?
Which ones have you read? Let us know. She will type in a minute. She says reading about a real person would be fascinating, so she thinks it sounds awesome.
Good, excellent. Thank you. I hope you like it.
So just some really quick questions now to tie up everything. We want to know a little bit more about you as a reader. Who are your favorite authors, favorite books?
So my favorite writer really is Alice Monroe, the Canadian short story writer Alice Monroe, who I think is in her 80s now, if I'm not mistaken. I also, I'm trying to think of like sort of, it's so funny because of course I get asked this all the time, and I like keep a list of the books that I read. Oh, if you're interested in Hillary Clinton, and how can you not? Book is by a New York Times reporter named, I don't know if you say Chozick, I think you say Amy Chozick. Chozick, who wrote a book called Chasing Hillary, that's essentially about covering Hillary for the New York Times. And it's smart. I've definitely been reading, like I read, there's another book by a woman who is essentially sort of press director, Jennifer Palmieri, that's called Dear Madam President. And it's kind of like an open letter to the first female president, whomever that may be. I also, let's see, I just read a book that's coming out in February 2020 called Real Life by a writer named Brandon Taylor. And it takes place over this sort of one long weekend. And it's these biochemistry grad students I think it essentially takes place, it's like in an unnamed Midwestern college town. And they're sort of, falling in love and hooking up and betraying each other and, talking about their grad student studies and talking about the meaning of life. And the main character is a Black man in his late 20s. I think he's in his late 20s, or maybe in his mid 20s, from Alabama. And most of the other students are white. And so there's sort of interesting, I don't know, there's a lot of things about the book that are just like super interesting. And it's one of those books that's very, like you really, I love this in a book, you really feel what the characters feel, especially the main character, and kind of stay with them emotionally in the moment as every gesture unfolds and every thought crosses their mind, and like everything they notice in the physical world around them and every memory they have. So I think, by the way, as a side note, I feel as if when people say they don't like short stories, I think that sometimes what they mean is that they don't get emotion to sort of be introduced to and then sort of say farewell to so many different characters. And but the other thing is, I think they feel like they don't get emotionally invested in a kind of satisfying way. And I actually think maybe my characters are more emotionally vulnerable, even though in some people's assessment they're not likable, but they are still emotionally vulnerable, which I think maybe is what allows readers to kind of feel closer to them or something. But this book I'm talking about, Real Life by Brandon Taylor, it's definitely a book where the characters are very flawed and vulnerable, and they feel real and you feel close to them. Oh, I just read, should I keep going? I'm doing an event. I live in Minneapolis. This is, by the way, this is like the rapid fire answer round, isn't it? This is my, I'll say two more books. And
no, you're fine. It's just a couple more questions, so we're good.
There's two essay collections I just read. One is by the musician and writer Dessa. She's she's been in this rap collective for 15 years. She's also like a solo artist. And so it's just really interesting essays about kind of like being on the road and being a musician. And then there's also this thing about, she was essentially so heartbroken after a long-term relationship that she had, of course, it's escaping me what it's called now, but she had something that's kind of supposed to like it's very like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where it's like almost trying to like eradicate the feelings and maybe even, or like this sort of, the feelings in your brain or in your body caused by your brain. It's called My Own Devices by Dessa. And then there's another essay collection is by a woman named Nora McInerney, and it's called No Happy Endings. And she's someone who, her first husband died when they were both in their early 30s of cancer. And she became a sort of like almost like a young grief spokesperson, I think somewhat to her own surprise. And then she ended up falling in love again and, pretty quickly being pregnant and remarrying. And I think she felt like this sort of confusion or ambivalence about the fact that she'd become known for like her grief over her first husband's death, which was very genuine, and she like loved him very deeply. But then the fact that she could move on, or not even move on, but she could find love again, I think makes her feel kind of, you know, self-conscious and self-doubt. And then also, of course, it's like wonderful and exciting. So those are two essay collections that I really enjoy, both of them. And those are both Minneapolis writers. And I, as of 1 year ago, I too am a Minneapolis writer. I'll answer if you have any more questions, I'll answer them more quickly.
That's okay. I will put all the links in the
oh yeah,
can find these. So in case anybody wants to pick up anything that you've been talking about. Our very last question is just, so you're done working on the Hillary Clinton book. So is there another book in the works, or are you just doing finishing touches on that one?
I'm almost doing like whatever it is that comes before finishing touches I'm doing, and then I'll do finishing touches, okay. And then I'll write another book, and then I loved writing You Think It, I'll Say It, so I might write another story collection. Don't tell my publisher. No, just kidding. Thank you all so much for joining this discussion tonight and bearing with my technological ineptness and weird camera angles. Yeah, thank you so much, Erin.
No, thank you. Thank you for writing the book and for participating and giving us the inside scoop, and also letting us see what's on your games collection.
No, oh my God. Okay, all right. Take care.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.